Have you ever found yourself feeling, I don't know, a little too safe?
How do you mean?
Like maybe you get some new safety gear or there's a high-tech system at work and it sort of subtly changes how you behave, makes you push limits you wouldn't normally?
Oh, okay, yeah. I think I know what you're getting at. It's a fascinating thing that, almost counterintuitive.
Exactly. And it's precisely what we're going to unpack today.
Right. This is the Peltzman effect, or you sometimes hear it called risk compensation theory.
Okay.
And, well, at its core, it suggests that when you put safety measures in place, people often adjust their behavior. They react to that perceived drop in risk.
So they might, maybe without even realizing it, become a bit less cautious than they were before.
That's the idea. It's not always a conscious choice to be reckless. It's almost like, our brains are running this quiet little risk assessment in the background.
So our mission for this deep dive, then, is to really get under the skin of this subtle but pretty powerful theory. We want to look at some of the surprising real-world examples. From driving to work, maybe even sports, and crucially, talk about what it means for risk managers.
Yeah, that's vital, especially for folks designing safe offices or trying to build a genuine culture of safety and security.
Absolutely. We want to give you practical, real-life insights, not just theory.
That's the core of it, really.
Yeah.
The Peltzman effect basically says you put in a safety measure, people might actually behave, well, a bit more recklessly.
It sounds mad when you first hear it put like that.
It does. It's not saying the safety measure is useless, not at all. But you see this behavioral offset, this change in how people act that can really eat into the benefit you expected to see, sometimes wiping it out entirely.
It's such a counterintuitive idea. Where did it first come from? Who noticed this?
Well, the name gives it away a bit. It traces back to 1975, an economist named Sam Peltzman.
Okay.
He was studying the effects of automobile safety regulation. And his initial finding was, well, pretty controversial at the time.
What did he find?
He suggested that new car safety features things like seatbelts, airbags, the stuff we take for granted now, didn't actually lead to a drop in overall highway deaths.
Wow. So his argument was basically, great, I've got an airbag. Now I can drive faster.
That was the hypothesis, yeah. That drivers compensated for feeling safer by taking more risks, driving faster, maybe following closer, that sort of thing. It offset the safety gains.
But I mean, the seatbelt does help in a crash, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's not that the features failed to protect people when a crash happened. It's that human behavior adapted to feeling safer, and that adaptation impacted the bigger picture, the overall statistics.
So what's going on in our heads then? Why do we do that? Why lower our guard just because something feels safer?
Well, psychologists point to a few things. First, just the perception of risk changes.
Right.
A new safety measure makes an activity feel less risky, and that perception alone can make us drop our guard a bit. It's that subconscious thought like, oh, this is safer now, I don't need to be quite so careful.
And if we feel less risk, our behavior just kind of adjusts automatically.
Pretty much. That leads to the second factor. The incentives change. If the perceived cost of doing something risky goes down because of the safety net, well, you might be more willing to take that risk.
So if I think the seatbelt means I won't get badly hurt, the cost of driving a bit too fast feels lower.
Exactly. You're less deterred by the potential consequences.
Is there something deeper going on too, like psychologically?
Yeah, that's the third bit. Psychological adaptation. That sense of security can actually boost our confidence, sometimes too much. It can even lead to this feeling of being, invulnerable.
Oh, yeah, I know that feeling.
And that encourages riskier actions. It's like you build up a tolerance because you feel cushioned. The safety measure creates this kind of psychological buffer zone for being a bit more daring.
Okay, understanding the theory is one thing, but seeing it in action, that's where it really hits home, isn't it?
Definitely.
So beyond that initial car safety idea, where else does this pop up?
Well, let's stick with cars for a minute longer, because there's more there. Peltzman's original idea about seatbelts and airbags. Other studies sort of backed it up initially. Some drivers did seem to get more aggressive. There was a researcher, John Adams, back in '81, who even argued that the injuries were just shifted, fewer car occupants getting hurt, maybe, but more pedestrians and cyclists, because the drivers felt safer and took more risks.
But hang on, that sounds like an argument against seatbelts, and we know they save lives, so how does that square?
That's a really important point. It shows the complexity here. Later studies, big ones, like in 2007 and 2003, did find clear overall reductions in deaths, thanks to seatbelt laws.
Ah, okay.
So while risk compensation might happen, and it might reduce the expected benefit, the benefit you'd predict if behavior stayed the same, it doesn't necessarily wipe out the entire benefit of the safety measure itself. It's not usually an all or nothing thing.
Right. What about anti-lock brakes, ABS? I definitely felt safer when I first drove a car with those. Thought I could stop on a dime in the wet.
Huh. Yeah, that's a common feeling.
Yeah.
And studies actually showed that. Research from Canada, Denmark, Germany found drivers with ABS often did drive faster, follow closer, brake later.
So did ABS actually make roads safer overall?
Paradoxically, some studies found no measurable improvement. There was a famous one with taxis in Munich.
Oh, yeah.
Cabs with ABS actually had slightly higher crash rates than ones without. Suggests drivers were maybe over-relying on the tech. Though, interestingly, for motorbikes, some other studies did find ABS significantly cut fatal crashes. So it's not always the same outcome.
Huh, that's weirdly inconsistent. Okay, what about that Swedish driving change, 1967, right?
Oh.
When they switched sides of the road.
Oh, that's a classic, a fantastic real-world experiment. When Sweden switched from driving on the left to the right, there was this immediate sharp drop in accidents and deaths.
Why? Just because everyone was suddenly terrified?
Pretty much. The perceived risk shot through the roof. Everyone was uncertain, hyper-aware, super cautious. But it didn't last. As drivers got used to the new system, they slipped back into their old habits, and the accident rates climbed back up to where they were before. The safety boost was temporary, fueled by that initial heightened sense of risk.
And speed limits. Surely lower limits mean fewer accidents.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But just changing the sign often isn't enough. If there's no enforcement or no traffic calming measures like speed bumps, behavior just adapts. People speed anyway if they think they can get away with it.
It's fascinating. But what about when designers actually use this effect on purpose? You mentioned shared space. That sounds like organized chaos.
It kind of is, but it's brilliantly counterintuitive. Shared space design deliberately removes things like road markings, curbs, sometimes even traffic lights,
Why on earth would you do that?
to increase the perceived risk and uncertainty for everyone, drivers, cyclists, pedestrians. And paradoxically, that makes people slow down, become more alert, make eye contact, negotiate the space more carefully.
And it works.
The evidence suggests it leads to lower speeds and fewer casualties, because everyone is forced to pay attention instead of just blindly following rules or rely on signals.
Wow. Okay, so this isn't just about roads. You mentioned infrastructure.
Yeah, think about flood defenses, like levees.
Right. They make you feel safe from floods.
Exactly. And that feeling of safety can encourage people to build houses, businesses right in the floodplain. Unsafe development happens because the levee feels like total protection.
But if a huge flood comes, or the levee fails,
The disaster is much, much worse than it would have been without the levee, because more valuable stuff and more people are in harm's way, lured there by that false sense of security. It's a big, long-term risk increase.
that's sobering. What about sports? Helmets, pads?
Yeah.
They're all about safety.
They are, and they absolutely prevent injuries and save lives.
Yeah.
But you can see the Peltzman effect there, too. Think about martial arts boxing gloves, for instance.
Yeah.
They protect the hands, sure, but they might also allow fighters to hit harder and more often to the head than they would bare knuckle, potentially leading to more serious brain injuries over time, even if hand injuries are reduced.
And ski helmets. Almost everyone wears one now. Does that make people ski faster, take more risks on the slopes?
Some studies suggest yes. Helmeted skiers, on average, tend to ski faster. Some research indicates they might have a higher overall risk index, even though the helmet definitely helps prevent less severe head injuries. Findings are a bit mixed, but the theory is that the helmet provides that psychological cushion, encouraging more speed or riskier lines.
It reminds me of American football helmets. Those hard shells were a safety innovation, weren't they? But then head injuries seem to go up.
It's a similar kind of debate. When hard shells came in, replacing softer leather helmets, some argue it changed the game. Players felt protected, maybe started using the helmet as a weapon, leading with their heads and tackles in a way they wouldn't have before. That false sense of security potentially led to more dangerous play and, paradoxically, more head injuries.
And skydiving. I think you mentioned a rule.
Yeah, Booth's rule, #2, often credited to the skydiving gear innovator Bill Booth. It basically says, the safer skydiving gear becomes, the more chances skydivers will take in order to keep the fatality rate constant.
Seriously? The death rate stays the same even with better gear.
Roughly, yes, when you adjust for the number of people doing it. Despite amazing advances, better parachutes, reserve chutes, automatic activation devices that open your reserve if you don't, the fatality rate hasn't plummeted. Why? Because people push the envelope with the new gear. High-performance canopies, flying faster, doing radical maneuvers closer to the ground. The gear enables riskier styles of jumping.
Wow. It even crops up in public health, doesn't it? Like
Yeah.
with vaccines or HIV prevention. That feels like a really tricky area.
It is incredibly complex and sensitive. But yeah, take vaccines. When a disease seems largely eradicated thanks to vaccination, the perceived risk drops to near zero. For some, that might lower the urgency to vaccinate, or maybe they become less careful about other hygiene measures because the main threat feels gone.
And with HIV. Things like pre-IP, the preventative medication.
Again, it's complicated, but there's evidence suggesting that for some individuals, knowing they're protected by pre-EP or having access to condoms might lead to riskier sexual behaviors, maybe less consistent condom use, or more partners. This doesn't negate the huge benefits of these interventions, but it can sometimes lead to increases in other STIs, for example. It's that risk compensation playing out.
And finance. Big regulations came in after the 2008 crisis. Did Peltzman show up there?
Oh, absolutely. It's often discussed as moral hazard in finance. The idea is that stricter rules, deposit insurance, the implicit promise of government bailouts if things go really wrong.
Yeah.
Well, they can make banks or financial institutions feel safer. And if they feel protected from the worst consequences of failure, they might actually be incentivized to take bigger risks in pursuit of higher profits, knowing there's a safety net below them.
Okay, wow. This effect is literally everywhere once you start looking for it.
It really is.
So let's bring this right back home. The so what for our listeners, especially if they're risk managers or involved in workplace safety and security, how does knowing about the Peltzman effect help design better, safer offices and foster that genuine safety culture?
This is absolutely the key takeaway. But first, a really important disclaimer.
Okay.
Understanding the Peltzman effect is not about saying safety measures are bad or pointless or shouldn't be implemented. Not at all. They are essential.
Right.
The goal is to understand how we humans react to safety measures psychologically, so we can anticipate those reactions and design systems that maximize the benefits while minimizing those unintended consequences. It's about being smarter, more strategic, not cynical about safety.
Got it. So for a risk manager thinking about their office, how do you fight that tendency for people to lower their guard? Let's say you install a really fancy new access control system, biometric scanners, gates, the works. Where's the Peltzman pitfall?
Well, that very robust system creates a strong perception of security, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So employees might think, okay, security's handled. They might become less likely to challenge someone unfamiliar walking in behind them. They might hold the door open more readily, assuming the system will catch anyone dodgy. The tech creates a false sense of total coverage.
Okay, so just installing the tech isn't the full answer. You need the human bit too.
Exactly. You absolutely need to supplement that physical tech with ongoing awareness. Training, campaigns that foster personal vigilance, that encourage a see something, say something culture. You almost need to explicitly teach people about the Peltzman effect in this context. Look, the system is great, but it needs you to still be alert. Make them active partners.
That makes total sense. What about cybersecurity? That's huge now. Companies roll out advanced firewalls, AI threat detection, mandatory multi-factor authentication.
It's the digital version of the levee problem, potentially.
How so?
Employees might feel so protected by all that tech that they get complacent about the basics. Maybe they're a bit less cautious about clicking links in emails, or they reuse passwords, or they dismiss security prompts thinking the system will catch any real threats. They trust the digital walls completely.
So again, the tech is only one piece. Human behavior is the weak link, potentially made weaker by the tech itself.
It can be, yeah. So risk managers need regular, engaging training, not just tick-box compliance stuff. Training that really hammers home human vulnerability, the need for individual diligence despite the tech. And simulated phishing attacks are great for this. They keep people on their toes, remind them they can be fooled. It's about active, ongoing reinforcement.
Okay, let's talk health and safety protocols. Maybe a company has a big zero-incident target or lots of wellness programs. Sounds positive.
And they generally are. But the potential downside is underreporting.
People don't want to spoil the record.
Exactly. If there's immense pressure to hit that zero, employees might hide near misses or minor injuries. They fear blame or letting the team down. And that creates this dangerous false sense of security because the hidden data means you're not learning from those smaller incidents. It's like the public health examples reduced apparent risk leading to hidden dangers.
So what's the antidote to that? How do you get the real picture?
You have to build a truly blame-free reporting culture. Make it crystal clear that reporting near misses is not failure, it's a vital learning opportunity. Emphasize continuous improvement through honesty, not just hitting a target. That honest data is gold for actually making things safer.
And what about safety equipment itself? Top-of-the-line ergonomic chairs or mandatory gear like special gloves in a lab or hard hats if there's construction nearby.
Well, just like the sports helmets or the boxing gloves we talked about.
People might get careless because the gear feels invincible.
Precisely. Someone with amazing ergonomic support might sit badly for longer periods. Someone with super protective gloves might handle chemicals a bit less carefully than they would with basic gloves or, bare hands. They assume the gear offers total protection.
So the training around the gear needs to be more nuanced.
Yes. It can't just be, here's the gear, wear it. Training needs to explicitly highlight the limits of the protection. It has to constantly reinforce the need for careful behavior and personal responsibility alongside the equipment. It's about partnership and safety, not just relying on the gear.
This all seems to point towards fostering a really proactive safety culture. It sounds like maybe we need less focus on just adding passive layers and more on embracing that shared space idea in the workplace.
That's a really insightful way to put it, yes. Instead of only adding passive safety nets, risk managers should think about how to intentionally design processes, or even physical spaces sometimes, that increase perceived accountability and encourage active caution.
How do you do that?
By finding ways to make employees active participants, constantly aware, not just passive recipients relying on a system or a rule. How do you make safety and security a conscious, ongoing act for everyone? It's about designing for human vigilance, not just assuming it.
This has been really eye-opening, seeing how this hidden psychological effect can undermine safety efforts. But like you said, theories like this often have debates around them. The Peltzman effect isn't accepted hook, line, and sinker by everyone, is it?
No, you're right. It's widely discussed. And the phenomenon seems real in many contexts. But there is debate about how strong it is and whether it applies everywhere. For instance, people went back and reanalyzed Peltzman's original car safety data. They found some errors in the data, apparently, and his model didn't do a great job of predicting death rates before the regulations came in.
So some studies directly contradict his initial findings, especially on seatbelts reducing overall deaths.
Exactly. As we mentioned, plenty of later studies show a clear net benefit from seatbelt loss, significantly reducing fatalities, even if some behavioral compensation occurs. So it suggests the effect might exist, but it doesn't always cancel out the primary safety benefit. It's complex.
You also touched on risk homeostasis earlier. That sounds related, but maybe more extreme.
Yeah, proposed by Gerald Weil back in 1982. It's a bit more controversial. His idea is that people have a sort of internal risk thermostat, a target level of risk they're comfortable with.
Okay.
And they'll adjust their behavior, speeding up, slowing down, being more or less careful to keep the perceived risk around that target level. He talked about 4 factors: the expected benefits and costs of both risky and safe actions. He used examples like the Swedish driving change, where caution wore off, and that Munich taxi study with ABS to support it.
But why is that idea so controversial, more so than Peltzman?
Because the strong version of risk homeostasis implies that safety measures ultimately don't reduce fatalities in the long run, because people will always compensate fully to get back to their target risk level.
Ah, I see.
And that clashes pretty hard with a lot of real-world data, especially traffic safety statistics, which generally show fatalities do decline over decades as cars and roads get safer. Many researchers really push back hard against pure risk homeostasis for that reason. Some have been quite dismissive, comparing its more extreme claims to, well, believing the Earth is flat.
Okay, so the big picture here, the main takeaway for anyone thinking about safety isn't don't bother with safety measures. It's
that you absolutely must implement safety measures, but you also have to understand the human element. You have to anticipate how people will likely react to feeling safer.
Right.
The extent of risk compensation is debated, sure, but the phenomenon itself, that behavior adapts to perceived risk, is a vital consideration.
Yeah.
It might not wipe out all the benefits, but it can definitely reduce them if you don't account for it. Safety is as much about psychology as it is about engineering or rules.
This has been a really fascinating deep dive. The core message seems so important. Yes, safety measures are crucial, but truly effective safety means understanding that human adaptation, that Peltzman effect. We need to manage those adaptations proactively to get the real benefits we're aiming for and build systems that are genuinely resilient.
Exactly. It pushes us beyond just implementation, towards designing for actual human behavior.
So a final thought for you listening out there. What stands out to you about how this applies to your world? Where in your own life, or maybe your workplace, do you see this effect playing out? Or where might you even be subject to it without realizing? How could you perhaps design things differently, interventions that don't just add a layer of safety, but also actively foster that ongoing vigilance and responsible behavior? Think about it. Because this subtle effect is likely shaping risks all around us in ways we rarely stop to consider,